All right, we are here. We are back. Studio Beyond. We're ready. I think we're excited. We're grateful.
I think I'm excited.
Yeah, we're excited. We got organizer, community builder, founder of the wonderful space, IMAN, spiritual steward in our community and city and beyond. We got Rami Nashashibi in the house. Burr, 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 burr.
Peace and blessings, man. Honor to be here.
Much love. We gonna just hop right in it. We start each conversation. It's now become somewhat of a ritual of a two-part question, and it's rooted in time.
Mm-hmm.
And so in this time, define that however you will,
Yep.
this day, this hour, this season, this lifetime, how is the world treating you and how are you treating the world, Rami?
Well, I first and foremost start, with just nothing but gratitude to the two of you for your patience and your generosity in inviting me to be a part of this, this project and, these conversations that you all are having. So much love to both of you. Begin also, as in our tradition, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of the Most High, the Most Gracious, the Most Merciful, rooting my words and my time with you also in gratitude to the Most High and to all the forces of good in the universe that have allowed me to get up in this morning and to be alive, to breathe, to try to get it right again. All the ancestral forces that made it possible for us to be here, those who endured extraordinary suffering for us to even be able to have a conversation like the one that we're having. Never taking that for granted. And so I cannot but begin by saying the universe and the force and the creator and all that is good in the universe continues to bestow upon me blessings that I feel unworthy of and forever grateful for and forever committed to trying to persist in struggle to demonstrate my worthiness and to try to aspire towards worthiness of all the extraordinary blessings, the privilege, the love, the mercy that have been poured into me by, again, first and foremost, the Most High, and then all of the beautiful stewards and people that have struggled with me and alongside me and mentored me. So I cannot be anything but grateful in this moment, even amid the profound level of suffering that you cannot but be alive to also in this moment here and across the globe. As a grandson of Palestinian refugees and as a Palestinian that is very alive to where we are in this moment, I cannot but also be attuned to that that struggle that we are, alive during a time of genocide. And that is going to be, I believe, not a controversial statement in many years. People are not probably in a few years. I think the reality is we are watching an extraordinary, horrific level of suffering be inflicted upon innocents every single day in ways that are unlike anything we've experienced in our lifetime.
One, I just want to breathe that in as, I'm feeling and thinking about the real people and the real lineages. I think one of the tragedies of this moment is to be abreast. The only way it can really be communicated is through numbers, which both the numbers are overwhelming, but I think can flatten or condense the actual spread of humanity that is being damaged, destroyed, wounded irreparably.
Yeah, all that's being lost.
And so I'm sitting with that, but my first curiosity comes to an intentional choice of language you were just making, and just want to unpack where it came from. You kept saying to be alive to, and I'm wondering what informed that choice of vocabulary, and what are you countering it from? What are the other word choices that this is an intentional jump towards? And what does it mean to be the opposite of that in this time?
That's a problem. I appreciate that question. in the Muslim tradition, the ancestral call to prayer
Mm-hmm.
begins that you can, if you've ever traveled from Senegal to, provinces in China to across the globe here on the south side of Chicago, the west side, the mu'adhan, the caller to prayer. The first brother that did that was by the name of Bilal from modern day Tigray, Ethiopia, who was an enslaved person who also at the time was liberated himself and many others through his struggle. But the call to prayer is interesting because it in the middle of that call, you'll hear the mu'adhin, the caller to prayer, say hayya ala salat, hayya ala falah, which sometimes gets translated as come to prayer, come to success. But the actual word hay comes from the Arabic word come alive, come to life, come alive, right? To be alive, to come, in other words, in some ways, we all have the capacity. Part of the beauty and struggle of the human experience is that we can be alive in a moment or we can be dead in a moment. Back in the day, Q-Tip had that famous line in Tribe about bringing, the job of the MC was to bring people alive, right? And this idea that we're kind of part of we can easily fall into the walking dead. And being alive to something is being spiritually, socially, culturally alive to the realities, the potentialities, the possibilities, and also the horrors. Prayer is like supposed to bring you, supposed to awaken something in you. Your meditation should awaken that spiritual sensibility that can often be muted, that can be suppressed, that can be, sometimes curtailed. And part of our tradition, when it's operating the way I think it should be, is trying to make us alive to those things, make us aware of those things, that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, and that in our spiritual humanity, we become attuned to things that sometimes, we are often struggling up against. Ed Chambers, one of the great students of Saul Alinsky, kind of, was rooting community organizing in that theological sensibility, that community organizing at its best was making the organizer alive to the tension between the world as it could be and the world as is. And the more you're alive to it, right, the more you're agitated by trying to fill that gap, to close that gap. And that the human experience is never, we come to a theological, spiritual realization that this world will never fully close that gap. But being alive to the tension is being a human being. The more that you become, if you will, accustomed to leaving, to to that tension, to that gap, the more you become, acculturated to accepting it as. It's just part of our world.
I'm hearing it as spiritual death, really.
Yeah, it is a spiritual death. And so being alive to that. So for me, I love the types of moments that allow me to live into being alive to something.
Even when painful.
Even when painful. Even when painful. There's a power in that. Yeah.
I want to talk about that distance that you just named, because it rings true in a lot of our understanding of the work coming out of the Boggses, because they speak a lot about this. What do we do with this distance between our ideal and our reality, and how do we hold that contradiction and the dialectic of it, that both exist at the same time?
You said coming out of the what?
Jimmy and Grace Lee Boggs in Detroit, who built incredible communal power over decades, and as well as like really impactful philosophical work that shaped our lives, so much of our work.
I'm not familiar with him.
Yeah, you got to read Revolution and Evolution in the 20th Century.
It's
one of the greatest texts.
And I have a strong feeling you're going to read a lot of things that you're like, oh, I've already had that thought.
I said that. It's like putting into language. It was published in 1974. Jimmy and Grace were, in many ways, like in the cohort of C.L.R. James. And then kind of broke off. They were rooted out of Detroit. Jimmy is a sharecropper from Mississippi
Mm.
who moved to Detroit and became an auto worker and then did a lot of work in the unions.
Okay.
Grace was a philosophy student from New York, first generation Chinese.
Mm.
Actually lived in Chicago.
Lived in Chicago for a while, and then basically her like commitment to her understanding of Marx's ideas
Mm-hmm.
led her to this CRLR James contingency, when then they kind of took base in Detroit, and for about 50 years were it's actually like, I'm very excited for you to learn this history, because it's really, especially their Detroit summer was, you know, after all of this years of like theoretical
it's
musing.
so closely aligned to the work. This is
they really are seen as some of the pioneers of like connecting community organizing and transformation to urban agriculture, to street murals, to youth arts programs, as a way to address, you know, as divestment in Detroit and deindustrialization was happening, the rise of, you know, drug addiction and the street violence that like coordinated with that. And
so who did they, what was it, you know, like IAF became the vehicle, which again had a lot of problems, right? But was still a kind of the institutionalized vehicle for how Alinsky-based organizing and then led to like Third World, or you know, the Center for Third World Organizing and stuff like that. But what came out of there? What was their pedagogical tool that kind of helped deliver their pedagogy across the country? Was there an institutionalization of it?
No, I wouldn't say that.
There is like a Bog Center that's in, but it's just the home that they lived in, that now people who worked with them have built a space that people gather in and study.
They built they had a publication called The Correspondence. That was like really the core of their work for a few decades. They built an organization called the National Organization of American Revolutionaries, who a mentor of ours was kind of raised up in, and so that's, you know, how we got connected to her, but to them. But like, I understand your question. I'm trying to locate, like, is there a national internet? They kind of broke out of a lot of those contingencies of really critiquing the ways in which a lot of the traditional Marxist spaces, including some of CLR James's thoughts, were discounting the Black freedom movement as actually the central thrust of what revolutionary change can look like in the world.
I'd love to read this.
I mean, there's so much. So
I kind of think we should just stop recording and go drive to Detroit right now. It's really what I'm feeling.
Because then there's the book about them, their life, called In Love and Struggle. There's Grace's book, which is right in your wheelhouse, The Next American Revolution,
which she wrote in the early 2010s.
Yeah, she lived to be 101 years old. And so she's like, you know, Angela was really close with her. A lot of your people will know them. So I'm really excited that
thank you, man.
We'll have you back on to do a little book club.
You feel the massive gap in my life. All right, I feel okay. I feel
everything else is gravy.
I feel
fed. I
feel fed.
We did our job.
I'm glad. You know, listen. Over the years, I've learned to, you know, sometimes you're in conversation, especially with organizers, and you know, sometimes people are embarrassed to stop in the middle of conversation. I don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
No.
like, who are you referencing?
Like, one of the single most important things is that actually, because the is so destructive to intellectual growth.
No, and I will thing at the moment.
Because
but you don't want to over-explain, so you want to be careful.
No, you don't want to do that. And what I find also, certainly in progressive liberal spaces, but even in revolutionary spaces, the presumption that we're all aligned.
Ooh, that was a deep lesson for me.
Right? To stop and say, I'm still struggling with that idea. Can you break that down for me?
Yeah.
Or I too have had some issues with it. Or like, and I think that's sometimes those inability to have those moments.
Or the nasty inverse of the assumption of like, oh, you don't, like, we didn't do it in that moment. We did assume that you know, but like, oh, you don't know the Bogs, or oh, you didn't read this, you're not up on the
right. I mean, I'm working in the space that's not, I don't care about that anymore. I don't know about that. So, or, you know, I know as someone who has been in classrooms and I'm genuine about it. Like, I never stop learning. I never stop like coveting information about our stories, about people who put me, look, as a Palestinian, I remember it was a former Panther, CP dude that put me up on aspects of my story that I had never, as a kid, been exposed to. That helped inform like 30 years of my life.
Right.
And it's funny because I ran into this brother maybe 3 years ago, and you know, some of the most influential people in your life, how they're like, they don't recall it that way.
Yeah, I just said what's
I'm
up.
like, yeah, like they're like, yo, what's up? I'm like, bro, do you know what you did to me that year? They're like, and it's funny because sometimes people come up to me that way, and I think about those moments. I'm like, I don't even remember that conversation, my brother. Yeah. Like, no, you said
great
something.
To see you again.
Yeah, it's good seeing you. Yeah, like that's how he was.
That
like,
happened to be the 6 months I was telling everybody.
Yeah. Like I was like, man, I mention you all the time, bro, as the pivotal like dude that completely changed my entire world. And he was, and he put me up on stuff, but it was always in that spirit, like, oh no, you don't know about. Let me put you up on that. Like let me put you up on that.
Yeah,
you don't know about it. Nah.
And what a gift.
Yeah,
what an exchange. And like so, what you're kind of doing and telling that backstory, and kind of what you asked us about the Bogs, I want to like use that frame to like focus in on your story, because we're like introducing you to these amazing figures, and you start asking these questions like, oh, how do I place them? Where do I locate their trajectory? Right. And I want to do the same thing for you, IMAN. And so, do we start with the founding of the organization, or should the story go back further?
I mean, look, the founding of the organization is a good moment, if none. You know, I think for me, you know, the Inner City Muslim Action Network gets incorporated in '97. The lead up, as most of we can imagine, is like 4 or 5 years of work before that. And for me, it was that work leading up to the stuff that kind of an awakening. I was I come back to Chicago after a sojourn of like 19 years of my life where I'm jumping around multiple countries, multiple cities, parents, you know, ugly divorce. I had never really brought up in the States for any extended period of time, other than I think a little small stint during my mom's divorce where she had to come back and try to get resettled on things. She is the child of the Nakba. She literally May 27th, 1948. So she was born in flight. And through her, my grandfather, who died recently, a couple of years, and we're very close to him. He and I was his eldest grandchild, and the one that kind of like kept him engaged and connected to these conversations we were always having. But he settled in Inglewood, like in 1951. Wow! Among the first kind of Palestinian families to be present on the South Side. His first house was right there, right next to Laughlin and 65th.
Could I just ask, as much or as little as you want to share, how did they end up in Chicago, in that neighborhood? What was the journey to here?
I mean, the journey was, for him, it was a journey of, the brother had like a 6th grade education, but he was also like, he had some extraordinary mechanical aptitude. So he learned, there was the Royal Air Force, the British Air Force, and he always was fascinated with flight. And, he went and gangstered himself a job working on airplane engines as a young kid. And when he got to Chicago, he quickly, honed in on that and got became the first like Palestinian brown dude working at Midway as an engineer.
This is before we started recording. We were speaking of the deep love and admiration for Midway, and the plot thickens where the roots are deep.
Very deep, bro. Very deep, and it really, because he got his first apartment was on Stony Island. Then he moved to Stewart, and then got a first house on Laughlin. And at the time, remember, Inglewood was outside of the central business district, probably one of the most, and that's what my grandfather obsessed about throughout his entire life, that Inglewood was the most thriving neighborhood outside of central business district in the country. He would show you pictures of 63rd Street all the way from Stony Island up to Midway. You can come and catch a single train cart, trolley that used to go along 63rd from Stony all the way to Cicero. Wow. Wow. And alongside, he used to tell me that he really up until his literally last day of life, he used to say, he was obsessed with 63rd Street. My grandfather was singularly obsessed with 63rd and Jerusalem. Like, he could tell you, he would pivot with me about conversations between both and about his life in both, And
I'm just, as you tell this story, I'm just like seeing so many poems or so many like,
yeah.
I have a title of like 63rd in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
In my head.
Yeah,
Sounds
totally.
super fire,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
like the planes.
Yeah.
Planes
No,
Streetcar.
and he comes from a Jerusalem village called Ain Kadam. And so part of my book is exploring this idea from Inglewood to Ain Kadam.
Okay, there you go.
right
You
there.
already
So-
on it. Let me show
yeah, yeah. Because it's a big part of his story, or Ain Kadam to Inglewood and back. But my father's family is a deep Jerusalem family. It's still in Jerusalem. Like they're one of the old school, like they're, there's like 5 big Jerusalem families. And so they come from a different kind of, if you will, breed of Palestinian families that are like deep urban Jerusalemites, the Nashashibis. Whereas my grandmother, on my grandfather, my mom's side, they're more like the urban, what they're called falahin, for like the peasant families, right? Well, my grandfather's kind of like on my father's side, they got streets named after him in Jerusalem.
Right.
Like he has like serious. They had the mayor of Jerusalem was a Nashashibi, so they have that type of kind of is interesting juxtaposition,
Yeah,
right?
like
kind of with
in
the
that
family.
space, how would these families have ever crossed? What would the relationship be?
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. So, so they came and they settled, and they went through that whole journey. My father did meet my mother in a interesting kind of moment when both of them, I think, were like fleeing from their previous relationships, fleeing from like some different issues, and ended up in Jordan. I was born there in 1972, and shortly after what was called Black September in Jordan, which was a whole series of things connected to I think my life was always shaped. Like most Palestinians, right? Your life was always shaped by that struggle in some way or the other.
The timeline.
Everything is kind of like, up against those moments. And, but, my parents had a divorce, and then it wasn't the cleanest of divorces, and it was kind of a little messy. Long story short is I ended up back on the South Side, making a decision to come to Chicago. And when I came to Chicago, I ended up getting pulled, really, the gravitational pull. It was Mama Camille O'Day,
Shout out.
Yeah, who's really like a mother to me, and someone who, called me, heard about me, and said, I heard you're doing all this activism. And when I came back into Chicago, like 1992, it was that brother that I was talking to, that former Panther. He was working at this, it was called the Palestine Solidarity Committee at the time.
Wow.
That was like...
what did he say?
Well, he said a lot. I mean, he said a lot. And I didn't say much. I literally had a notebook. And this was a brother I got assigned to. It was funny because it was just like 3 people. And they said, go work with Brother James. And I said, okay. And James he really made his money from like just a nighttime security post. And this is really before I also kind of had spiritual... I was still kind of exploring. I wasn't raised in any particular religious tradition, and so I was still exploring all of those things in my life. And I would just go sit with James all night long during his security gigs. So he would start at 12 a.m. At the time, we were smoking copious amounts of stuff, and I'd bring a little bag and roll a couple joints and stay up all night. And
when she said the spiritually searching, I was like, there was some weed going on.
Yeah, there was some weed going on.
Spiritual seeking security guard. We're smoking some weed.
Yeah, that's it.
I didn't want to put that joke on your story, but I knew.
Things check out.
That till today, like I haven't, when you kind of make your commitment on some of the Muslim things, your life isn't perfect. You're clear. You're a human being. And I struggle still with a lot of things, but thank God I made the commitment off substances that I would, make the shift. Because till today, I don't mind the smell of weed. Like I cannot stand alcohol. Like, and that was an easy thing for me to transition from. As a kid growing up, my father died of it, and I buried him of it. And so there's a lot of but I could still be in a room and not mind. But I've stayed away from it.
You can approach it from an enlightened step, like, I am not here to judge.
I'm not here to judge. You smoke it, All right.
We view it as aromatics.
It's an aromatics.
Everyone's on their own journey.
But
Brother
James would stay up all night and just he would just kind of school me on everything really, including, and then during the day we would walk, and this is because I had not been, this is before I really even knew Chicago well.
Right.
James was like, let's go to the West Side. Let me tell you about the Vice Lords. Let me tell you about the Moes. Let me tell you about the Four Corner Hustlers. Let me tell you about, where progressive, like, you don't want to,
some real power mapping.
Really power mapping, his own experience as a black man that grew up in, it was like he had almost like the Richard Wright native son experience about being in the Communist Party at some point, how much that turned him off as a black man, just the politics of progressive radical spaces. And then he made me aware of the African-Palestinian tradition, which ends up playing a very big part in my life early on. Then, because of James, he started telling me about, he had been to Gaza already in the early 90s, like 4 or 5 times. He knew these Palestinian families. And I remember sitting with James and just hearing him with this, like, he had such a vivid way of, and such a loving way. I think it was the first time too, in the presence of someone like him, heard someone talk about our people with such beauty, and I remember what impact that had on me. It's just, just like, we're beautiful people.
How did you understand that at the time? Feeling that reflected or refracted from him?
There was just something about this brother speaking to the beauty of our spirit, our culture, our vibes, the way he connected threads between Palestinian, Cuban, Panamanian, South Side, West Side. It was the first time I had made those type of connections. I was very aware of being Palestinian, obviously, and very aware of our struggle, but not. I think
in isolation, maybe.
In isolation, definitely in isolation. It was through him that I think it kind of awakened an understanding. And at the time, I think I was, we had a subway campaign, Your Tax Dollars at Work, and it was a picture of the first Intifada, a kind of a classic photo of a young Palestinian kid being manhandled by a group of IDF soldiers. And it became very apparent to me during that kind of internship with James, and I was like, what am I doing? Like, how are you going to get global solidarity? Because one of the things James made me do is he sat me down, and at the time, this documentary called The Panama Deception had come out. It was really about the American invasion in Panama. And it's interesting because now that's such an open part of this man's conversation again. But it was really kind of broke down the history of our engagement in Panama. And I remember that being like a life-changing moment for me. Already I was in the, if you will, in the arms of a mentor who was kind of slowly breaking down my worldview and kind of reassembling this much more global way of connecting the dots, first and foremost between the beauty of our peoples, beauty that I had up until that point not seen celebrated the way that he was able to, just through his recollection of these stories, who these people are talking about. And that, I was 19 years old, and that's the first time I had heard, especially a black man who had been through struggle, talk that way. And I think already, as someone who was kind of gravitating towards hip hop, and my spiritual social consciousness had already been awakened by Chuck D and those folks. And so to have that type of narration was already
your own personal Chuck D.
Yeah, really, it was.
I got Chuck D at home.
It was connecting me in ways that was blowing my mind. I got a private enemy. that was blowing my mind. And then he sat down, and I think he knew, okay, now I need to break this down for you, because I think when I watched that, I had to shut it off in the middle. I couldn't even finish the documentary. I said, I can't finish this, bro. I had to sit with it. That really rocked my world. And among the things, it said, how are we going to get folks cognizant, unconscious about kind of colonial exploits 10,000 miles away when they're not even aware? Because I remembered the Panamanian invasion on CNN. It was a cute little thing. CNN, Marines were playing rock music. Noriega was, put on compound. And here was a documentary like exposing this entire colonial history between Colombia and Panama, between what we had did, the mass graves of thousands of young men that we had rounded up on these compounds. And I was just completely shut down by it for a moment. And it made me much more conscious of the fact that, man, we have to build here. We have to do work here. And I think the summer afterwards is when I got a call from Camille, who said, listen, we heard about you. We heard this guy who's active and engaged and coming from our community, comes from this well-known family. And I was I was of Chicago, but not, I was kind of connected to it, but not of it, so to speak, because I was always a little bit of an insider outsider because I'd not grown up here, had a lot of my mom's family that was still here, but I was very distant from a lot of them because they had not known me, they had not seen me, and I had a different last name. There's not many from my father's family that's here. So she had heard of me, but said, I think I was that summer committed to going to places like Cabrini Green. I was ready to go there. And she's like, I hear you want to go there, but they already have tons of folks that are doing stuff there. There's a spot here on 63rd. A lot of young Palestinian kids are being brought up with, no support whatsoever. Would you be willing to run this program over the summer? And so that's what brought me back to 63rd. This was like 1992, 93. And when I got there, I'm seeing all of the dynamics of Black and brown communities struggling with all the symptoms of poverty and gang violence and stuff, and no real vehicle and to kind of organize them. And at the same time, I'm having this spiritual kind of awakening of sorts. Like I'm really struggling with not just thinking about the political context of liberation, but what does a spiritual pathway for liberation look like? And it was actually, it was interesting because it was kids of former Panthers, because I'm already now really gravitating towards the Black liberation struggle as like my point of reference for everything, because of people like James that helped me understand my connection to Puerto Rican struggles and Palestinian struggles. And I'm so gravitating towards that there was a son of one of them that now started confronting me about, well, what about your Muslim identity? And I'm like, well, yeah, I don't have it. I don't really have it. And you can't be serious about, because I had never really opened up a Quran or any spiritual text, but I think I was operating off the assumption I had been exposed throughout my little journeys as a kid to what I thought. I spent a couple of years in Saudi Arabia.
It's part of the fabric. It's not the embroidery.
And I had never walked into a mosque. I had never prayed, even culturally. Right. That's how kind of disconnected I was. But I had thought in my 19-year-old hubris that I figured it all out, and all religion was forms of oppression. Institutionalized religion, that was my line. Right. And I was like, man, you can't really take this seriously, to some of these guys that are coming out of like the Black liberation struggle who are now Muslim. People who have been influenced by people like H. Rap Brown, who are now Imam Jamil. Of course, there's a long lineage of Islam being internalized within the Black community as an expression, both within hip hop and of course within, liberation struggles. And so now they want to kind of, I had these conversations during this moment about, well, where's your Muslim identity? And I'm like, I don't really have a Muslim identity but that kind of pushed me on I said, okay, I really have to take this on. I have to take this on. And so at the same time, as I'm coming to the South Side, I'm organizing, I'm discovering, wow, this is powerful in a way that I had never really experienced. And I think the spiritual identity alongside the artistic sensibility, like I'm really, of course, more and more gravitating towards kind of hip hop as
Are you rapping at the time? Are you
No.
DJing?
I think I'm just
tagging?
I'm just really I'm fascinated by the movement. I'm adjacent to the organizers at the time. I'm around organizers. I'm organizing with hip hop. Like I'm bringing La Vie and I, you know, La Vie.
No.
There was a group back in the day. La Vie was part of Stony Island. La Vie's still tagging. What was La Vie? Raven? You don't know that tag? Yeah, he's a writer. Zor, you remember Zor? Right?
Yeah,
okay. So these are old school, like early '90s, both hip hop.
I was born in '92.
Okay, yeah. So these guys were around then. These are kind of early. Your dad probably remembers them, and but so like I'm adjacent to them. I'm bringing them to the South Side. I start very quickly leveraging the cipher as an organizing tool, right, to bring our communities together. Before there was a University of Hip Hop, see, that led to the emergence of the University of Hip Hop on 63rd when I brought La Vie and Raven and Zor to, you know, Raven Zor to the do the first, if you will, I think it was the first time it had ever been done in the city, a synthesis of Islamic calligraphy and graph writing together. So we started doing murals on the walls that were a celebration of that cultural tradition. So I was really coming into my Muslim spiritual identity, coming into this kind of hip hop sensibility, along with this kind of organizing, the liberation framework, all at the same time. And it all kind of coalesced around the formation of IMAN, right, in like those mid 90s.
Totally. So it's this, like, you know, I feel it sounds like it's a time where there's this, not distillate, but like the soup gets all mixed up and then like reduced and you come out is a little bit what I'm hearing. Like there are these elements that are not in and of themselves necessarily like overlapping. You are the overlap internally. You're moving through it. You're figuring out like, okay, this is a sense of self, a sense of purpose, a sense of connection. Does that ring true?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think it shapes me intellectually, culturally, politically, spiritually.
Yeah.
I'm definitely being formed in this moment. And it's a very formative moment.
So I want to talk a little bit about, use the word adjacency and the relationship to, you know, there's the like political and cultural traditions and there's the emergence of hip hop. And, you know, you said you hadn't been in Chicago through this whole time. How did you, in this time of making and remaking yourself and how you relate, how did you hold that adjacency? Was it a position of comfort? Was it a position of challenge? Was it a position of discomfort? Like, in seeing what you've done since, it's so clearly like how integrated and whole the relationship for you between hip hop as a cultural tradition, the Black freedom movement, Black liberation traditions, like this is the fabric for you. But it sounds like that took some forging. Was that, what were the challenges, contradictions that you held moving through that? And were there moments of like conflict internally or externally?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I still think that in some ways, and this is, I've come to appreciate this, you know, again, in the world, not of it. And I think I still don't feel, there's no place I feel more at home, you know, these days than in certain spaces, because I do now see them as ancestral. I feel like there's a lineage, there's a connection that goes beyond space and time that I really believe in. I believe in an unseen world. I believe in unseen powers. I believe in those things. Those are not in any way, shape, or form. They're part of my reality now. And so when I'm there, you know, there's certain folks that come from that tradition. By that, I mean hip hop heads, for instance. There's something about an old school 90s hip hop head that just like spiritually, culturally, politically, when I'm in a studio with that person, like there's nothing that I just feel like I've been with you my entire lifetime and many lifetimes. But that's not the lifetime. That was a forging. And there's
nowhere that feels more like home, but that wasn't always home.
That wasn't always home. It does feel like home. It does feel like I've discovered that, and part of it perhaps because the greatest forging of awakening of my spiritual calling and sensibility came through those vehicles. It came in rooms, sitting, listening from the beginning to the end, an Ice-T album, or Ice-Q album with a brother, then that just broke all of that down for me, and it was opening. But I think I love your question about contradictions and inconsistencies, because I think also, I have a literary side to me too, and I love there's a part of me that just loves quiet, isolated spaces. I don't hang out a lot. A good time for me is a 5-hour solo bike ride, or just being in kind of isolated thinking spaces. And I appreciate that, by that I mean understanding that we do inhabit contradictory spaces, that there is extraordinary amounts of privilege, for instance, that I will still have that are absolutely light years beyond anything that I could help explain in a particular moment when I'm working in and with brothers that have never had the travel, for instance, that I've had access to, or some of the, just the tables that I've been able to be at, over the last 30 years. And so wrestling with that contradiction, I think, is not unlike wrestling with the gap, right, between the world as is, it could be. I think I've come to embrace that as what it means to be fully human, what I love about the Muslim tradition is there is, among the things that I think is so affirming for me, is that the actual creed, the declaration of faith in Islam, what's called the Shahada, right, which it means like multiple things. Among things, it means to bear witness, begins with a negation. In other words, it begins with Ashhadu an la.
Gotta read the box,
right?
Oh, I can't wait for you to read the box. I can't. It's like, oh, we're already here.
But
I'm sorry, I'm interrupting.
Let's name the negation.
The negation it negates every other source of divine power other than the divine power. So Ashhadu an la, I bear witness that there is no other source of divine power other than the divine power. In other words, I'm not an ideologue. I don't bow down to any particular ideology. I am not immune to my human contradictions. I understand that by the basis of any ideological pattern, I'm not going to fit that. I'm going to be a contradiction in walking terms. And I accept that. All of these are socially constructed realities. Race is a socially constructed reality. All of these things that we're trying to navigate, even our pathways to liberation, are going to, if we're not open to the fact that they're going to have inconsistencies and contradictions, and that we ourselves are going to be walking contradictions occasionally, if not occasionally, always, right? That there are going to be those contradictions. If we're not ready to explore those contradictions, then I think we're depriving ourselves of our full human, both frailties and potentialities. And that at the end of the day, again, the negation for me is, yeah, bro, that's dope, that's powerful, but I can't bow to that.
Right.
I can't bow to that. Like, what you've laid out to me, this pathway of liberation, it's dope, it's fresh, it's flies all out, but I still can't bow to it. Your interpretation of the divine is dope, it's fresh, it's fly, but I can't bow to that either. Like, I'm going to bow to my understanding of the oneness of the divine above and beyond everything else, and that's it. And there's a liberation for me in that helps then guide my own frailty. And in bowing there, I'm not just submitting, I'm admitting to my human frailty. There's a humility of putting my head to the floor 5 times a day to say that the most supreme part of my even physical anatomy, right, the mind that allows us to think and conjure up, try to explore language to articulate all the spectrum of things that we're feeling, ultimately I'm putting that on the ground 5 times a day at the very least, to say that we're a work in progress. We're trying to figure this whole joint out. We're making mistakes. We're messing up every time along the way. We're asking for forgiveness. And, that there's a beauty in that process that is liberatory for me.
So I'm hearing this liberatory process that is like rooted in humility, rooted in solidarity, rooted in this, process of moving through contradiction. And in that, you and your community and folks have built something that's really like marvelous on just like an objective level, like without getting into my specific politics and why I value it, just like on a material level, the amount of work, the amount of space, the amount of labor and energy that y'all
and needs
have
that have been met,
harnessed and like compounded is just like an impressive feat from an organizing scale. I want to really shout out Sadia, who brought me to, I can't even remember how many buildings we walked through, but like through campus wouldn't even be the word because it's like kind of deconstructed in the neighborhood. But once you understand the fibers that are connecting, it's like, this like the southwest side campus of community building that is spiritually rooted. It's powerful to like take in. And in that, right, there is this materialization or expression of the solidarity you told in your personal story, like this relationship to James, this relationship to the Black liberatory tradition, that I think counters people's communal understanding, or is something that I imagine the journey of all this work you have to bring a lot of people alive to. Right? Like similarly, I think folks perceive a lot of tension or lack of connection between Latinx and, Hispanic, we don't use that language, communities and the Black community. And like part of what I've had to do is like, okay, maybe that exists in the street or maybe colloquially you can understand these tensions. But my experience is the first civil disobedient arrest taking action I did, it was organizers from OCAD that participated and trained us up, right? So my experience is like the ultimate expression of solidarity. And so similarly, right, I think people discount the overlap between Blackness and Islam globally, but definitely in the United States where like Islam has a really Black face in ways that people don't really attune to.
Which is also part of the demonization of both and how that narrative has been.
So even that overlap being erased, and we're seeing these as two separate communities, which is not in reality true, but in that conception, it's again seen through this lens of conflict. Right? You know, the cliche store owner community, right? And so like I imagine in you building these work and you building programs for folks returning home and urban, all these hip hop community things, you yourself, but you're really inviting a lot of people to coming alive to a level of solidarity that is shrouded or not legible to most folks.
I love that concept of legibility, by the way.
Go from there.
Because I do at a certain point really start gravitating towards this idea, and often people around me will hear you can't be what you don't see. Among the mentors that also took me under the wing, and again, and that's why I'm very beholden to the mentors that have just found something, and oftentimes especially during those formative years, it was Black men who had patience with me, who found a way to take me under the wing in the late 90s. It was a lot of them that came out of movements like SNCC. It was a lot of them that started allowing me to be in those spaces and taking me across the country to Cleveland, Detroit, Philly. In Philly, it was a man by the name of Kenny Gamble, who we know also as Luqman Abdul Haq, his Muslim name, who was from the Gamble and Huff, perhaps one of the most powerful recording duos in American recording history. More platinum and gold singles written, for the Jackson 5 and a whole number of songs. He has one song that I always use kind of when I meditate on him called, If You Don't Know Me By Now, You Will Never Know Me. Simply right there. And I always feel like that's a classic song for you, because if you don't know him by now, you will never know how powerful. And he took all that money and then bought up a row of like crack homes in South Philly. And that became the epicenter of like 20, 30 blocks of extraordinary development. Outside of Jeffrey Canada and Greg Boyle, like one of the most amazing urban development pieces, along with lots of contradictions about eminent domain and all the things that go into like, I love that space of contradictions, not just for personal identity. It's like, how does then the revolutionary spirit translate into actually building real things on the ground? When you have to start working with GCs, developers, you're working with the city, Department of Planning and Zoning and dealing with all that stuff. How does that begin to, like, the mayors, all the women, you're calling up folks, right? How do your politics then turn into actually instantiating that in a way that you can feel, you can connect to? We took on the messiness. Like, I use this kind of metaphor of the mud to, like, our tradition says, run to the mess. Don't run away from it. The mud is malleable. You can make you get messy, you get muddy, and it can pull you down, but you can also then refashion things. You can remake things. And so one of the
There's
messy,
a lot of data in the mud.
yeah, and some of the messy intersections was the liquor store, right? Is where Palestinian, Yemeni store owners in the hood took up these spots, or the corner store in low-income Black communities, and where the brother, who had a crate, was from the Four Corners, Hustlers, or the Stones, or the GDs, or whoever neighborhood you were in, you were operating. There was a hip hop artist back in the day, Mickey Halstead, that had that, shout out to me.
No, a lot of his family.
Come out of the Hebrew tradition, and he had a track called The Corner Store. And I remember that track was really controversial because there was a lot of young Arab kids that was also operating and selling CDs at the time. And Mickey started getting death threats because, he had this one line in there that was like, I heard the owner say assalamu alaikum. But if you follow the Quran, why the F he selling bacon? Why the milk $5? And he goes on to a list of litany of complaints about the corner store, about the bulletproof glass. And there's this really radical video that he produced that at the end he's standing in front of the burning corner store. The hook was like, shorty, get your ass out of the corner store. Get yourself out of the liquor store. We used that video as a way to actually mobilize around a corner store campaign that was saying, look, rather than run away from these critiques, let's run to them. Let's run to them as contradictions about the vision of what Black and brown solidarity looks like, because we can romanticize it all day long, but what does it look like in the hood?
And it may exist in organizing spaces in ways that it doesn't in quotidian life.
And that's where, and for me, that's again, going back to that documentary, that moment with James, that was that light bulb moment for me. It's like, man, if it's not real on the streets, if it's not real in every day, it's not real. Yeah. And I started really gravitating towards that. I want to know how it shows up with the brothers that are, on the corner. I want to show in the actual, these messy spaces. That eventually I do a dissertation on the Mo's and hip hop and its encounter with Islam. That's kind of what inspired me to do that work, sociologically at the University of Chicago. But alongside, I never stopped working, building this organization. And, the concrete spaces, we knew that we were going to have a campaign that was going to actually, we were bringing Lupe in front of the stores when he came out with his corner store track, the liquor store, food and liquor, right? And, he was in front of the store. We were engaging surveys, store owners. We didn't want to demonize the store owners because a lot of them, it was a class issue. They didn't have MBAs from University of Chicago or Northwestern. They were running the stores like my cousin runs a store, razor thin margins. They got bulletproof glass and gaudy neon signs. That's what I do, right? But how to challenge that segment of our community alongside working with the brothers and sisters immediately in the community. We knew we ran a campaign. Eventually, we knew we were going to have to create a alternative that you can feel and touch and, see. We mounted an initiative in the early 2000s in Motown, and then eventually opened up this fresh market, Go Green Fresh Market right in the heart of Inglewood. You can walk up in there today and you can see no bulletproof glass, no grease dripping from the ceiling, no Lucy's, nothing that I wouldn't put on my own shelf, nothing that I wouldn't buy for my own family, nothing that you wouldn't buy for your own family. And in a business now that demonstrates it's viable, and you can see that, and you can touch it, and you can engage it. And so much of IMAN's work over the last 30 years has been, how do we take those theoretical lines that connect Black and brown in other communities, our faith communities even, where do we provide granular opportunities where, Jewish communities that are rooted in traditions of liberation in the Jewish tradition, Catholic tradition, Muslim tradition, beyond, interfaith conversations, have an opportunity to really challenge one another to demonstrate what that looks like in community. And that's been a big part of our work as well.
That's so beautiful. I don't want to spend too much time on this. I want to get through more of the story, but just in hearing that, I'm curious, can you break down some of the history of how the corner store dynamic came to be? Because I can understand how it developed once it began into what it is now.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, all small businesses are under immense price pressures.
Yeah.
And the idea of the American dream being through commerce is like,
and where different communities are allowed to engage the market,
right?
Being kind of like the tip of the spear of capital in communities that other people have not been interested in going into.
It lands in communities from somewhat of like a conspiratorial sense of like, no, this is not just profits, that this was placed here in a way that feels predatory.
Yeah.
And some of that, I'm sure is just like market dynamics playing out, because all businesses are predatory, and particularly all businesses that are in Black communities have a history of being predatory. But and this is not just also Muslim, right? I think, East Asian communities have some of these same dynamics.
Historically, Jewish communities also as well.
What history of like how that came to be a dynamic, or how that's planned?
Yeah, it's a deep sociological history that goes way back, of course. But
we'll just link to your dissertation notes.
But part of that is look, sociologically they talk about it as the middleman minority, right? And there are some texts like Bitter Fruit that kind of talks about it in New York being the Korean community. It's Do the Right Thing, kind of Sal's Pizzeria in the middle of Harlem. The reality in neighborhoods in cities like Chicago, Cleveland, New Orleans, throughout the kind of these countries that once had a more thriving industrial sector, that when there was a more thriving Black middle class, and part of the displacement, part of the criminal disinvestment of this community was also the flight of those sectors, not just of white folks, but also the kind of Black middle class. And so you were left with this ghetto.
And people from Olympia Fields came from somewhere.
Right. And, it's like the 70s, 80s, 90s, you begin to see this hollowed out, what they were using as this post-industrial urban ghettos, and in that time, it so happens to be the flood of a kind of new set of migrants after this Civil Rights Act lifts the ban of immigration that was in place from 1924 up until the direct correlation with the civil rights and Black freedom struggle lifts the ban, so that now you start seeing an influx of some of these communities into urban centers.
And that was 65 that the Immigration Act was passed, right?
Yeah, and then you begin to then see subsequent other global things on the radar, like the 67 war, or other things that begin to precipitate different flows.
Right.
Now, for some of those flows, they were very upward bound, right? You begin to see a new kind of class dynamic among Southeast Asian, Indian, Pakistani.
Which largely was about who, yes, you could come from that country, but you had to have a certain credential or a certain accreditation or academic degree.
And you came and you already knew proximity to whiteness was success. So then you begin to see the phenomena of, the unwritten formula that everyone has kind of, when you're kind of living in the context of a country that has already defined those parameters very clear, these upward bound immigrants, you begin to see the pockets of these formations of these kind of communities alongside the rings of these suburbs, where they end up being the only really thriving pocket of non-white folks in these white suburbs. Meanwhile, there were other migration streams of poor working class communities of color, including Arabs, that were coming, and they started setting up businesses in these hollowed out inner city communities, getting access to capital through ways that, of course, predisposed them towards leveraging their relationships that existed in ways that were more intact than a community that had been besieged of decades of not only disinvestment, but redlining and restricted covenants and everything else that the Black community was struggling up against, that gave the immigrant community a little more leverage and opportunity to open up businesses, open up licenses. And so, the view of it being conspiratorial is not off. There is a grand conspiracy. It's just who conspired. Right? It's like, it's called the grand conspiracy. It's called white supremacy.
Yet again,
that is a real thing.
Yet again,
right?
the bad guys are the same bad guys.
It's not a made up thing. It's real. It created redlining. It created restricted covenants. It created a type of persistent urban poverty.
Who was able to get loans for businesses and homes.
And so then they start operating in these kind of businesses in the 80s and 90s, and not so ironically, some of those very same businesses that Palestinian owners are taking were Jewish migrants, right? Are immigrants, and some of the
especially
very same
on the west side.
Yeah, in the west side, but also on the south side, along streets like 63rd. You take the Polk brothers, you know, they had businesses. The Polk Brothers Foundation will still connect back to the south side because of that legacy. The synagogue that we work out of in terms of organizing out of Beth Shalom that existed, that was a sanctuary for King in 66 when he marched in Market Park. So Jewish communities have also been part of both the liberation conversation. You know, a mentor of mine and a friend who played a big role in kind of helping me reacclimate to the Jewish tradition was a man by the name of Rabbi Robert Marks. I always call him the greatest civil rights rabbi that you never heard of. And he marched with King, but more than, he always used to mess with me like, Rami, because I was always holding up, I used to carry the letter that Rabbi Marks wrote on August 5th, 1966 to the Congregation of Synagogues that he was assigned to as an observer, as an illustration of a loving agitation lever to your own faith community. But, and I got that letter partly in part of it actually inscribed on the memorial to Martin Luther King in Marquette Park today. And Marx's face is there. But he always used to joke with me, man, stop talking about that letter. I did more than just write that damn letter, you know. And he did. And he did. And he was more proud of the campaign he led on contract sales within the Jewish community, lovingly agitate the Jewish community about like its complicity in what was happening in the Black community. And for me, I always cite that as an inspiration for the Corner Store campaign, right? To take a page out of Marx to say, this is how you can lovingly, spiritually agitate your community within. So the first name of that campaign was Muslim Run, ? Campaign for health, wellness, and healing. Like our Corner Store campaign was questioning and challenging, like, what does it mean to run your business as a Muslim, right? Can you abide by the same principles and spiritual values? What does it mean to confront the contradictions that we all have, right? But what does it mean to kind of live into those, to lean into those contradictions as an opportunity to organize? And so that became a fertile ground, not to demonize the store owners, but to confront this legacy, to say that, that the legacy that we were just talking about is a deep, complicated, historical one. They're not the bad guys. They're not the ones that are shipping in crates of alcohol, right, to dump into a 700 square foot facility with, that barely can house anything edible,
a banana,
right? A banana. They're literally the middleman distributors for this poison in the community. And so we started to take that on in very real ways as a way to engage the complexity, to make more legible, that going back to that word legibility, right? To make more legible, like, okay, we have these lofty conversations about racial, political solidarities, but what does it look like on the corner, bro? How does it look like to the everyday folks that are engaging? This is their only encounter with someone outside the Black community on a daily basis. For some, for weeks on end, and some in months on end. How do you turn those spaces that are messy, complicated, full of contradiction into spaces that can be liberatory?
Yeah, and I think like that type of engagement with rigorous history is the best antidote to conspiracy. Like in that process of not trying to demonize people who are put in that position or choose to be in that position of that middle. There's limited agency and people can make different choices, but rather than they're the bad guys while still accounting for the harm that it might be creating. That's where like those historical trajectories are so important of like, no, they're the next iteration of this thing. The Baldwin essay on anti-Semitism where he's talking about like, they don't hate them because they're Jewish, they hate them because they're white. And they are the only engagement with a representative of white supremacy that you're engaging with in Harlem, and they're the ones selling you food that's expired and the bacon and the milk that's $5 and is about to go back. Like
your apartment,
This is the how do you understand the trajectory of the roles that different communities are put in as a way of not it helps that aliving be more rooted in truth. I think
and humanity,
and
an ability to still see in one another basic spiritual human potential.
So that is true and also really hard because the corner is a complex and layered space that you know better than I do. And it's tangible in a way that like you can do
It's
on
a
the ground.
literal intersection.
Right. How, you know, we've been talking about how we hold contradictions, how we hold that the complicated emotional reality of holding multiple truths at once, and trying to come out of it with some sense of, forget about hope, like aliveness and wholeness. It sounds like part of this on a personal level for you is also like, how do I live in a sense of like integrated wholeness?
Yeah.
And so it's a very broad question, but in the reality we've been talking about in our city, in our political reality, of course, in relationship to Palestine, like, how are you doing at holding that wholeness now? And what have you learned more recently? What have been the challenges that have come up from that? That you've been wrestling
are
with?
coming to alive to, you know, this over the last 18
And
months.
struggling with that experience
Yeah.
of confronting new contradictions.
Yeah. I'm in the thick of that.
Yeah.
And, you know, I had this meditation that I shared online recently and actually elicited very interesting responses, but it was I first was scribbling it backstage at the Gaza benefit concert we did with Common last year at the Ravinia. And, you know, we had Freeway, we had a beautiful show, but it ended up being on the eve of the 1-year anniversary of all of this horror.
Mm-hmm.
That was not of our making initially. That was the only day I could get Common. And it was like, we had a whole bunch of... We had
October 6th, that's what I got for you.
We had all these other plans. It was supposed to be before the DNC. I was going to have Alicia Keys and all these other big old names. But then...
I will say, of the many things we've talked about, you could have had a whole alternate career as a booking agent. You're very impressive at it.
It's because I've learned to bang on a door with no ego. For sure. 35, 40 times.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been grateful for the relationships that have kind of emerged really organically. People like Freeway, you know, who's like, he's an example. Like Freeway doesn't necessarily have a history of real explicit political, social commentary.
He's like, inner city, Muslim? You got me.
We're taking action?
That's real Free. And beyond that, Free is one of the most beautiful human beings walking on the face of the earth.
He reads that way.
He really is. And his heart is bigger than like, you just sit in a room with him. There's nobody on earth that I would rather listen to any piece of music with than Freeway. Because he feels that way. And I think that's an example of people who don't always have all the kind of like politically precise ways of expressing what they're feeling, but feel. And that for me in this moment also is ways in which I'm struggling with, because they're beautiful people. They're beautiful human beings that I know how to feel human suffering, that I know can feel pain. Either have not found the words to express the type of genocidal horror that's unfolding, are confounded by other forces to be able to speak to that pain authentically, condition the ability to speak to that pain on X, Y, and Z. In other words, if you don't say this, I can't say that. If you're not there. Look, I've, in this last 25 years, I'm probably, one of the few Palestinian-American organizers, community developers, whatever you want to call me at this point, and that has, also rooted my work in art, spirituality, and, has developed really strong relationships in and across the Jewish community, and has had very honest conversations in that community about this moment, some of them more helpful than others. And I like going to places where people can feel comfortable with being discomforted a little bit and outside the framework. I don't, again, if the only people were ever to have a conversation with me, I had to check off all the right boxes, I would not be here. I think that probably holds true for most of us, right? We're messy, contradictory works in progress.
Nope, not us. No,
You got
we
it all
nailed
figured
We
out?
figured it out.
Okay.
We're done.
All right.
No,
I found the two exceptions.
It's
man.
either true or we're 22. Those are the only options there. No, I'm kidding.
So all that to say, in this moment, you know, my piece was "We Are Not Well." I started coming on stage after a really messy moment in the middle of that concert. I was scheduled to say something, and I could not say anything, speak to that. I don't know if you were there, but I just had a meditation to say, "We are not well." Yeah. The piece then ends by saying, "We are not well, but we are wells. We are wells. We are reservoirs that, you know, have deeply rooted streams of love and consciousness that have fed our people ancestral for ways that ancestrally that we can tap into, that need to tap into." And so there are moments in this particular moment that I feel alive to the possibilities of sustaining myself in the midst of that. Yeah. And there are moments that I feel completely and utterly hopeless and helpless, especially in trying to see what, if any, role our work, my life can be in, you know, easing the pain and suffering of my people.
Yeah. You spoke to what my follow-up question was, so I'll just like give it as offering, and also want to be considerate of your time. I know we got to get you out of here, but so much of that initial response to being witness, being in partnership, being an agitator, being in community with folks who are coming alive in this moment, what I hear, and it is so often the mode that folks of us who do community work go to, is so much of your response was about them, right? About the folks that you have to have difficult conversations with, or the folks who are not yet ready. And where you kind of concluded with "We are not well, but we are wells" is like where I want to end with you, of, you know, as an observer, as a supporter, as someone in solidarity with just the larger struggle. This is not something I've seen you only experience, but in some ways you've kind of been preparing yourself to guide people, to teach, to speak, to love. And there's something unfair, at the least, of like in this moment, having to look outward, having to steward, when you are obviously have to be so impacted, your people, your family, right? Like, and I'm sure you have also had the space to look inward and to hold and hug your close loved ones, but maybe not. Maybe that's not a proper assumption in this time. So yeah, I'm struggling to get it back to question or interview, but what I'm feeling, what I'm trying to name, is like your own humanity, your own spirit, your own pain and agony during this time, while at the same time having to be on stages of thousands of people, having to fly around, having to still do the coalitions, having to do the program that you planned 4 years ago that like was before, you know, this time, but like we still gotta, you know, fill out the paperwork. And so I guess I'll just kind of conclude myself with just offering you love.
Thank you, my brother.
And witness to the grace of, in the time of such horror, still showing up in the same ethic of 92, of 97, of 07, of 2015, in the time where, a level of violence beyond what we can really conceive is happening to your home and happening to your people. So I just want to offer you that love of you so nobly carrying that, when really the human instinct should be to go within and kind of detach from all of this.
Yeah. I struggle with nobly, because I don't know if I'm doing that, but I do really receive all of that coming from you, and I don't take any of it for granted. And I think it is. I just read Sojourner's Truth's kind of like journey in one of her books, and it's just like there was a moment in the chapter talking about the horrific incident she witnessed. I won't even go into detail because we need trigger warnings and stuff. But it's what communities have witness, have been inflicted upon, it's I cannot help but like just be witness to that when people are pouring in and coming from that history of struggle, to feel that in a way that is life transforming. When I went to Jerusalem, I was in Jerusalem. I was on a trip called Black Jerusalem, as I spent 3 years kind of curating. Our last day was October 7th.
Oh, Xavier was with you, right?
Yeah, Xavier was with us. And there was a moment I took the entire delegation, the first time ever, to the Nashashibi property in Sheikh Jarrah, which is where my father's from. And this was at one point in its like heyday, the grand Nashashibi estate, you know, one of the largest Palestinian-owned pieces of property right north of the old city. And in the last 10, 15 years, it's become kind of like my cousins. Two of my cousins still live there. They've had to put barbed wire all along the fence. They got 2 Doberman pictures. One of my cousins, who's also struggling with alcohol, is living in the rubble of the home my father grew up in. And the other one is living in a small little space that, you know, water's dripping in. So they're struggling. And it's kind of a struggle that comes with also a bit of shame. You know, we're not able to do more. We can barely hold on. But there was a moment that I talked to my cousins about doing something. I said, let's do something we've never done. And let's host them. One of my cousins leads this. It's called the Tastes of Palestine. He now has a company where he teaches both autistic kids and young and visitors about culinary Palestinian dishes that are made from the land. And he specializes in picking and foraging in places where Palestinian villages used to be, and to go to like pre-1948 recipes. And so he's created this beautiful work of love that he pours into food. And I said, Hani, his name is Hani, I said, listen, let's do something that we've never done on this land. And part of occupation and part of oppression is people become very suspicious of everyone. Like who's who? Like Rami, who you bringing in? Is this some folks coming to usurp the land? I'm like, no. I promise you, this is a delegation unlike any other delegation I've been working. I had Pastor Otis Moss. I had all these folks that, you know, were coming, artists. And I say all this to get to the last point you left on, that at one point they cleared the land and we had this marvelous lunch on a Sunday after Pastor Moss preached on the pastor of Mount of Olives. We went straight from the Mount of Olives to my land in Jerusalem. And it was unlike any other Palestinian meal I've ever had in my life. It was the most gorgeous meal you could have ever thought. It was all made outside. Pumpkin, roasted, you know, fresh cucumbers picked from this village. It was just the right type of mix between pomegranates and meats and fruit and vegetables, all laid out really beautifully. My cousins had picked up the glass from the land, picked up the rubble, saw this gorgeous piece. And at one point, the sister that I made the album with, This Love Thing, from Buffalo, New York, Drea Deneur, you know, our first video was called Mama Please. It was a single that, you know, took the call of those last moments of George Floyd as the hook for the track. Because even in the Arabic language, calling on your mother is when you are in pain. If you stub your toe, you yell out Yama, which is you call on your mother almost for release, for support. It's almost like a call on the divine. So we use that. And my cousins, and that they had seen that video, they'd seen Drea. And my cousin, Hani, at some point, right towards the end, wanted to express what it meant for Drea to be on the land with us. Here was a Black woman who had been, you know, he had just watched the movie on Emmett Till the day before. And he also, the week earlier, one of his colleagues' son, 15-year-old son, was shot and killed on the station just right by our house. And they left him there for hours. And he had to go, and they refused to allow his mother the opportunity to mourn him. And they took his body and did not allow them to do a funeral procession because they said they thought he had a knife. and they unloaded untold rounds into this young boy's body. And so here's this man, this Palestinian, who's making this food out of love. We have rabbis, priests, folks, Muslims on this land. It's a multi-faith delegation of mostly black folks. And he's looking at Drea, who's didn't have to say much to him. She just like held his hand, and I saw him just break out, and he needed that. And I think more than ever in this moment, I'm finding that across all of our traditions. Like there's no words right now, but there is a spiritual alignment. When I run into First Nation folks that, in this moment, we don't have to say anything to one another. And sometimes I just literally cry into their shoulders and I may never see them again. I think that's where we are in this moment. And I feel it with friends who are coming out of the Jewish tradition who don't have words, but just say, I'm here, and I feel it that somehow, some way, amid all of the horror, that there is a source of liberation in that. And so I receive your words that way, my brother. And I know you come from that tradition, and I'm grateful for it.
Much love.
Yeah.
As we get out of here, I'm glad we've been talking about how language holds contradiction. And what I'm hearing is that there's a way through that doesn't come from saying the right words, but comes from the ways we hold each other. So thank you for holding this time with us and being willing to be held by and hold so many. How can folks find you and your work in the ways you want to be found?
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. IMAN is online. It's imancentral.org.
It's one of our most difficult transition to plugs I've ever done.
No, it's all right. No, but I appreciate that. And I do appreciate people staying connected to our work and following it in Chicago and Atlanta, especially in this moment, supporting it, praying for it. It is our life's work. And in some very real ways, it still aspires to be so much more than it is right now. And it means a tremendous amount. The word iman is the Arabic Swahili word for faith. It comes out of this West African tradition of what it means to stand in faith, to believe in something greater than ourselves, no matter where we are, what we're confronting. And so as an effort, it is more than a nonprofit organization for us. It's a movement. It's an expression of that faith. And so you can find that. You can find me online and at least on IG these days, I think. I've kind of like tapped out of other things, but I'm trying and I appreciate being here. I really do appreciate you, brothers, and hope you can edit this into some type of coherent conversation. Your magical editing powers.
The thing about not there's no words for it. It's like, shit, then how do you say anything? I'm like, thank you so much for the generosity. We'll be back.
Thank you for helping us be more alive.
We'll be back reshaping culture for the more liberatory and creative.
Much love to the people.
Peace.
Peace. Assalamu alaikum.